My family thought it was a joke to leave me stranded in a small town. See if she can survive on her own. They laughed and left me behind. I never came back. 10 years later, they found me. 134 missed calls. The summer I turned 22 was supposed to be like any other working at my dad's hardware store, living at home because college wasn't even an option according to my father, Jack, and being the eternal punching bag for my older brother, Chris. We weren't poor, but we sure weren't the kind of family that went on vacations to Disney. So, when my dad announced we were taking a road trip to my uncle's wedding in Colorado, I should have known something was off. It didn't take long for the tension to return once we hit the road. I had hoped maybe this time things would be different, maybe my dad would finally see me. But the usual pattern reappeared. Dad and Chris were having their usual fun at my expense, laughing and making me the target of every joke. It was like I didn't even exist except as the family joke. My dad would shoot me a glance, shake his head, and mutter something about how I was always too sensitive. And every time they passed a rest stop or a break, I would be left behind, left out of the jokes, the laughter, the conversations. I couldn't help but feel like an outsider in my own family, again. One morning, we stopped at a rest area in Colorado. I had been sleeping in the back of the Suburban, and my legs were stiff. I needed to stretch and use the bathroom. It was a quiet spot, with fields stretching out in every direction and mountains in the distance. I figured it was a perfect place to take a quick break. I didn't take my phone or my wallet, who would? We were in the middle of nowhere. I went inside, used the bathroom, and didn't think anything of it. When I came out, squinting against the bright Colorado sun, the Suburban was gone. At first, I thought they were just playing a prank on me, like one of those jokes they love to pull. But when I walked around the entire rest area and saw no sign of the car, I started to feel that cold, sinking feeling in my stomach. They weren't coming back. I waited. Minutes turned into hours. I sat on the curb, trying to convince myself that they were just messing with me. But then the thought hit me, they had left me here. Just like that. They'd driven off, and I was nothing more than an afterthought. My mind raced. I thought about calling them, begging them to come back, but then something stopped me. I could almost hear the mocking voices of my father and brother in my head. He'll figure it out if he's not as stupid as he looks. He's probably crying right now. Every cruel thing they had ever said to me flashed through my mind, and in that moment, I realized something. I wasn't going to call them. I wasn't going to beg them for anything. They had treated me like I didn't matter my whole life, and now they had proven it to me. I made a decision. I wasn't going to let this define me. I wasn't going to let their cruelty break me. I walked up to a woman with 2 kids, asking to borrow her phone. I didn't call my family. I called the nearest shelter, and in that moment I decided to do this on my own. I didn't need them. I never had. That decision changed everything for me. I realized that this wasn't just another one of their games. This was my chance to take control of my life for the first time. I wasn't going to let them drag me down anymore. I never thought I'd end up here alone, in the middle of nowhere, with nothing but the clothes on my back and a sinking feeling in my chest. But there I was, stranded at a Colorado rest stop, the last place I'd ever expected to be abandoned by my own family. I couldn't shake the thought that something was deeply wrong. It wasn't just about being left behind. It was about the betrayal. They had done this to me before, in small, insidious ways, but this was something else. This was the moment I realized that my family had never really cared for me the way they should have. For the first hour, I told myself that they'd just pulled around the corner or moved the car for some strange reason. I tried to be calm, thinking, they'll be back. They can't leave me here. But as the minutes passed, the harsh reality settled in like a heavy weight on my chest. The parking lot was eerily empty, and I was still sitting on the curb, trying to convince myself they were just playing one of their cruel jokes. But the truth hit me. They had left me. I should have felt anger, or maybe I did, but the overwhelming emotion was just numbness. A lifetime of being treated as if I didn't matter, a lifetime of insults disguised as jokes, it all flooded me at once. "You're too sensitive, Emily," my dad would always say. "You'll figure it out if you're not so stupid," Chris, my older brother, would add with a smirk. The memories of their taunts, the subtle and not so subtle ways they made me feel invisible, came rushing back. They had always found ways to remind me that I was never enough, never the one who truly belonged. What hurt more was that, despite everything, I still felt a small part of me wishing they would come back, wishing they would apologize and act like a family. But I knew I couldn't keep waiting for that to happen. They had made it clear that I wasn't worth the trouble, and I had to face the fact that I wasn't going to get what I always craved: love and approval from them. It was time to stop playing their game. I sat there for a while, letting the full weight of the situation sink in. I could have tried calling them, begging them to come back, but then I realized something. They didn't deserve that kind of energy from me anymore. I didn't need their validation. I didn't need to beg to be part of their family. They had made their choice, and now I had to make mine. That's when I walked up to a woman with 2 kids sitting on the grass nearby. She gave me a puzzled look, and I asked if I could use her phone. Her hesitation was obvious, but I looked so helpless. I suppose she felt bad for me. I didn't hesitate when I asked her to call a local shelter in Grand Junction. It was only 40 miles away, but I had no way of getting there on my own. She agreed reluctantly and drove me to the shelter, not asking too many questions, but the feeling of being taken care of, even for just a brief moment, was a relief I hadn't felt in a long time. That night, as I lay on a cot in the shelter, I couldn't shake the feeling of helplessness. How had I gotten here? But as the night wore on, something else grew inside me: determination. I had no money, no ID, nothing. But I had my mind, and I knew I could figure this out. I wasn't just going to let this be the end of my story. The next day, I went online using one of the shelter's computers. I found the address of my uncle's wedding from the invitation I had once seen. But then I asked myself, why should I chase after people who had just abandoned me? The answer was simple: I shouldn't. I spent the next few hours researching ways to get emergency ID replacement, looking for jobs that paid in cash. And then it clicked: I was going to start over. I wasn't going back to them. I wasn't going back to the family who saw me as a joke. I was going to make it on my own, and if that meant scraping the bottom of the barrel, so be it. 2 days later, I was washing dishes at a small diner called Sonny's. The owner, Geraldine, was a woman in her 60s with purple-streaked gray hair and more tattoos than anyone would expect. She didn't ask questions when I told her I had no wallet, no ID, just that I needed work. She handed me a sponge and said, "Dishwasher quit yesterday. You steal from me. You're dead. Start now." I didn't need anything more than that. I had a job, and that was enough to get started. The first few days were a blur. I worked double shifts, slept in the shelter, and wore donated clothes. But there was a fire inside me now. I was no longer that scared, invisible girl. I was someone else, someone who was finally going to take control. I wasn't going to let anyone walk all over me anymore. Not my father, not my brother, not even myself. In the weeks that followed, I started to rebuild my life piece by piece. It wasn't easy, but it was the first time I had truly felt like I was living for myself. I wasn't relying on anyone else's approval, and that felt liberating. I had no idea where it would take me, but for the first time in my life, I was in charge of my own destiny. The loss of Geraldine hit me harder than I ever expected. I had always thought that if I just worked hard enough, kept my head down, and did my best, I would eventually find my way. Geraldine had been my anchor, the one person who saw me for who I truly was, not just a failure or a disappointment. She had taught me not only how to work in the kitchen, but how to stand tall despite the weight of everything that had ever held me down. Her sudden death felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. Geraldine had become a mother figure in my life, the person who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Losing her left me empty and reeling, and for a while I didn't know what to do. I buried myself in work, thinking if I could just stay busy, I could outrun the pain. But the truth was, I was running from myself, trying to outrun the overwhelming loneliness that seemed to be creeping back into my life. the same loneliness I had felt when I was abandoned by my family. The first few days after Geraldine passed were a blur. I didn't want to deal with the emotions that were crashing down on me. All I wanted was for the world to stop spinning, for just a moment of peace. But peace didn't come. Instead, I found myself back at square one, questioning everything. What was I even doing here? What was the point of all the struggle, the fighting for a life of my own, when it felt like one thing after another kept knocking me down? I couldn't avoid the truth any longer. I was alone. For the first time in my life, I realized that I was not just physically alone, but emotionally isolated too. Geraldine's death had left a hole in my life that I wasn't sure I could fill. The realization hit me with such force that it knocked the wind out of me. The worst part? I didn't have a place to go. I didn't have anyone left. The people who should have been there, the family who had left me behind, had never been there for me, not in the way I needed. And they certainly weren't going to show up now. But then something shifted inside me. In the midst of my grief, I realized I had to keep moving forward. I couldn't afford to crumble now, not after everything I had fought for. I couldn't let Geraldine's death be the thing that broke me. She wouldn't want that. She'd want me to keep pushing, to keep going, to not let the pain define me. So I pulled myself together and went back to work. It was all I knew how to do. I started working harder than I ever had before, pouring all of my energy into the diner. I worked the line, I washed dishes, I took orders, and then, one night while I was working a double shift, something strange happened. I began to feel something that I hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. It wasn't a grand revelation, but it was enough. The sense of purpose I had been searching for had been right in front of me all along. This was my life now. It wasn't glamorous or easy, but it was mine, and that was more than I had ever had before. Slowly, the numbness started to fade, and I began to remember the woman Geraldine had believed I could be. She had always told me that I was stronger than I thought, that I could be someone if I just kept going. The day after Geraldine's funeral, I went to the local community center and signed up for classes. Business management, something my dad always mocked me for wanting to pursue. I had never even thought it was possible, but now something clicked. I had nothing to lose. If I could survive the family I had been born into, if I could survive the crushing weight of loneliness and grief, then I could take this next step. I was capable of more than I ever realized. But the journey wasn't easy. Even as I started making progress, it felt like the world was constantly testing me. Every new step felt like I was wading through quicksand, like I was fighting against the tide. But I pressed on. I wasn't going to let anything stop me. I wasn't going to let grief define me, or loneliness, or any of the people who had abandoned me. And then came the phone call. It was my mother, of all people. The weak voice on the other end of the line didn't sound like the woman who had been a distant, uninterested figure in my life for so long. She was frantic, desperate even. She told me how much they had been looking for me, how they had been worried, sick. My heart didn't race with hope. It clenched with cold clarity. This wasn't real concern. This wasn't about me. This was about them needing something. They always needed something. I didn't let myself get swept up in their narrative. I had been through this before. Empty apologies, empty promises. This time, I didn't bite. I didn't beg for their approval. I had nothing left to prove to them. I hung up the phone, not out of anger, but out of a quiet, unshakable resolve. I wasn't going back. They didn't deserve me, not in the way Geraldine did. In that moment, I knew that my future was mine to build, and I wasn't going to let anyone stand in my way. I wasn't going to let anyone who had abandoned me take that from me. Not again. I was going to make something of myself, not because they needed me, but because I needed to prove to myself that I could. Apologies for the confusion earlier. In the story you've provided, Alan is the protagonist's brother. I mistakenly included him in the previous response. Let me correct the details and adjust the text to ensure it matches the context of the story with the right characters. The first few weeks after the phone call from my mother were the hardest. They kept calling, leaving messages that sounded more desperate with each passing day. At first, I thought about answering, but each time I heard their voices, me mom, my dad, and even my brother, I felt the weight of all the years of neglect and cruelty, the endless disappointments, and the silent pleas I had sent into the void that was my family. They were not calling because they cared. They were calling because they needed something. It became clearer to me every day that no matter how much they begged, no matter how much they apologized, I was never going to be the person they wanted me to be. I wasn't going to be their punching bag anymore. I wasn't going to be the one who was always there to pick up the pieces when they fell apart. I wasn't going to let them pull me back into their toxic cycle. For years, I had thought that my love for them and my desire for their approval was the only thing that mattered, but I had been wrong. What I needed more than anything was peace. I needed to feel whole. And to do that, I had to cut them out of my life completely. As I sat in my small apartment, the reality of what I had done started to sink in. The relief that followed was like a wave crashing over me, washing away the guilt that had followed me for so long. I had finally chosen myself. It wasn't an easy decision, and some nights I would lie awake, my mind filled with doubt. The ache of abandonment still haunted me, but the clarity was undeniable. Every day that I didn't answer their calls, every day that I chose to move forward without them, I felt stronger. I kept working, kept building. My job at Sunny's had become more than just a way to survive, it had become my sanctuary. Geraldine's absence still felt like an open wound, but I could hear her voice in my head telling me to keep pushing, telling me to not let life defeat me. She had believed in me, in a way no one else ever had. And even in her absence, I still carried her spirit with me. Then, a few months later, the real turning point came. I was sitting in the diner, working a late shift when Kendra, a regular at Sunny's, looked up from her textbook and smiled at me for the first time. I had been serving her coffee for weeks, exchanging small talk, but she had always been absorbed in her studies, focused on the future she was building. This time, her eyes were different, warm, inviting, like she was seeing me for the first time. Not as the quiet dishwasher, but as someone with potential, someone who mattered. I didn't expect anything to come of it, but Kendra started talking to me more. We laughed about the stupidest things, and I realized that for the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible anymore. Kendra wasn't like my family. She didn't look at me with pity or disdain. She didn't see me as a failure or a joke. She saw me as I was a person, a flawed, real person with hopes and dreams. Slowly, we began to spend more time together outside the diner, and her genuine kindness began to break through the walls I had spent so long building around myself. But as much as I began to let her in, a part of me was still terrified. I had spent so much of my life afraid of being hurt, afraid of letting someone get too close. What if I was making a mistake? What if this was just another version of the same old heartbreak? But as I got to know Kendra better, I realized something. She was different. She didn't want to change me. She didn't want to fix me. She just accepted me for who I was, imperfections and all. A year later, Kendra and I moved in together. It was nothing extravagant, just a small 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of town, but it was ours. We made it ours, with mismatched furniture and plants that we couldn't seem to keep alive. I couldn't help but think how different my life was now. The thought of my family seemed so distant, like a faint memory I could barely touch. I had my own family now. Kendra, with her warmth and her quiet strength, was everything I had been searching for in the people who should have loved me. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly loved. One night, after we had finished dinner, Kendra asked me a simple question. Do you ever think about going back to them? My chest tightened, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. But then I smiled, my heart steady for the first time in years. No, I said softly. I'm done with them. I've made my peace with it. I'm finally where I'm supposed to be. And I meant it. The scars from my past would always be a part of me, but they no longer defined me. I had rebuilt my life on my own terms. I had built something better than I had ever imagined, a life filled with love, respect, and most importantly, peace. And as Kendra reached for my hand, I realized that I had finally found my place in this world. And it wasn't with the people who had abandoned me. It was with the person who had seen me for who I truly was. And for the first time in my life, I felt whole. The days following the phone call from my mother were a blur of emotions, each one more intense than the last. The moment they left the voicemail, I felt a sudden sense of control washing over me, something I hadn't felt in years. The guilt that used to drown me whenever they called, whenever they needed something, began to fade. But the relief was quickly replaced by a new feeling: anger. The kind of anger that comes from knowing you've been manipulated, used, and discarded by the people who should have protected you. But more than that, it was anger at myself for not having recognized the patterns sooner, for letting them get away with it for so long. The messages kept coming, one after another, full of fake apologies and pleas. "We've been worried sick. Where are you?" My mom's voice, shaky and drenched with what sounded like concern, was enough to make my skin crawl. They weren't worried, they were desperate. Desperate for something I had taken from them, their control over me. And in that moment, I knew I had to make a choice. I had to make it final. I couldn't let them back in, not after all that had happened, not after everything I'd learned about myself since I'd walked away from them. I couldn't ignore the pull of my old self, the one who still craved validation, who still wanted their approval, but this time, I refused to give in. The anger, the frustration, the betrayal, it all had to go somewhere, and I knew exactly where. I had to take it all, that suffocating weight of my past, and use it to fuel something new. And so, with that weight lifted off my shoulders, I began to rebuild my life, step by step. The first step was letting go truly and completely. I stopped checking my phone for their calls, stopped reading the desperate messages they sent. I blocked every number they used to reach me, one by one, and then I deleted them from my life. I didn't need them anymore. It was hard, yes, but it was necessary. I threw myself into work at Sunny's, throwing myself into something I knew wouldn't judge me, something that would let me grow without holding me back. Geraldine, who had become like a second mother to me, was my pillar, always offering guidance when I needed it most. But even she couldn't shield me from what was to come next, the question that had been looming over my head since that fateful day at the rest stop. Was I ready to truly leave my past behind? When I received the call from Kendra, I almost didn't answer, but I couldn't ignore the sense of connection I had felt with her since that first day she had walked into Sunny's. I had always kept people at arm's length, afraid to let them in, but Kendra was different. She didn't expect me to change. She didn't want me to be anyone other than myself. And when I finally did pick up the phone, I could hear her calm voice, reassuring me that I was safe, that it was okay to feel what I was feeling. Kendra's presence in my life felt like a breath of fresh air, the calm in the storm I had been navigating alone for so long. It wasn't just about finding love. It was about finding someone who truly understood me, someone who didn't need to change me to love me. And when she asked me, after months of quiet support, if I would be willing to move in with her, to start over, I realized something. I had already started over. I had already chosen a different path. I had already chosen to leave my past behind, to stop running after people who would never see me for who I truly was. I had made a life for myself, and now I was finally allowing myself to embrace the love that was right in front of me. Kendra and I moved in together, and it wasn't perfect. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. For the first time, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for so long. I had my own family now, the family I had built. The thought of my biological family, of my past, no longer held the power to break me. I had finally reclaimed my peace. And as I looked at the life I was creating with Kendra, I couldn't help but smile. This was my story now, and no one, not even my past, could take that away from me. This story highlights the importance of self-worth and boundaries, especially in toxic family dynamics. In life, we often seek validation from others, even when they've consistently shown us they don't respect or value us. The key takeaway here is that choosing yourself is not selfish, it's necessary for growth and mental well-being.